Hey, my friend, today I have an exciting interview with a doctor whose company provides you with longevity treatments that may increase how long you live. This is the first company of its kind in this space, and I can't wait for you to listen to what they're doing. So let's get into it. Today, my guest is Dr. Sajad Zalzala, who is the co-founder of a company called Agelessrx, and they help consumers get prescription medications that can help slow down the aging process. Dr. Z combines the unique qualities of an experienced doctor passionate about disease prevention and longevity with the strategic vision and skills of a serial entrepreneur. Dr. Z has been passionate about slowing and reversing age-related diseases for 20 years. He's one of the rare MDs personally licensed in all 50 states, as well as Washington, D.C. and Ontario in Canada. He has extensive experience working with startup companies in the telemedicine, telehealth field, and has been an advisor to multiple successful healthcare startups, including the Pill Club, Jack Health, and Forhims. You can access the show notes for today's episode at antiaginghacks.net/agelessrx. Dr. Z, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast. So glad you're here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, first of all, tell the listeners who you are and what your medical background is.
Sure. Well, my name is Sajad Zalzala. People call me Dr. Z. I'm a physician that I have a lot of experience in telemedicine and a lot of passion for helping treat the root cause of disease and aging. And it's pretty well known that the underlying cause of most chronic conditions for humans is premature aging or the aging process. So it's become kind of my mission to help treat and prevent those diseases.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you just said is in the community that we're in, we kind of know that aging is the disease that causes all others. But I think that the public at large is starting to learn that slowly because they're like, oh, wait, I got cancer, so I got to go fight cancer, or I've got diabetes. But all of these have one thing in common, which is aging. And
Exactly.
therefore, your medical background also is very interesting with what you're doing today because you work for telehealth groups and companies like Forhims and others, correct?
I've worked with some of those companies before, so I'm taking what I've learned with those companies and applying it to the longevity space. That's not something anybody's done so far.
Yeah,
and we're kind of cutting new path here.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you get interested in longevity? I know that it's still a fringe science to some, but for others, it's becoming more mainstream. What's your story with longevity in particular?
Yeah, so actually it goes back to medical school. So what I learned about like longevity from a book that I read in medical school that actually saved me from dropping out of medical school, because in medical school, you learn so much, especially the first year, you learn so much about physiology, biochemistry, like how the body's supposed to work, and then after that, you kind of learn like what the treatments are, and there seemed to be a really big disconnect there in terms of like the modalities we were learning in medical school just didn't seem to match up with what we should be doing in terms of like based on our knowledge of biochemistry and physiology and things like that. And so I almost dropped out because I didn't, like I said, I didn't really like that disconnect there. It wasn't until I learned about functional medicine that really kind of bridged that gap. And it made a lot of sense to me, where I kind of reinvigorated my passion for medicine, kept me in medical school. I was also, there was an interview with Ray Kurzweil. He wrote a book called Fantastic Voyage, Live Long Enough to Live Forever.
Yeah.
Now he's not a health person. He's a futurist inventor. But his idea is that eventually, maybe 50 years from now, we'll be able to upload our brain into a computer. But for guys his age, and probably maybe my and your age, we need to be healthy enough to make it until the technology is ready. If it's ever going to be ready, we're not sure. So his book was about what you can do now in the present in order to keep yourself healthy enough for technology to start kind of chipping away at that longevity, at the longevity puzzle.
Mm-hmm. So a very interesting follow-up question. I love Ray Kurzweil. This is such an expert in his field and a futurist. In terms of, talking about if this is normal aging where we are today or a few years ago, and then there's modalities which we can use to slow down aging, then there are some things we can do to reverse aging by a small amount. And then, of course, as you're referring to, there's the large technological breakthroughs which will allow us to reverse aging by a large amount or stay young forever, basically. in your subjective opinion, where are we on this spectrum with at least slowing down and reversing a little bit of aging?
Unfortunately, we're still in the early days. But fortunately or unfortunately, I mean, early days can be very exciting because you can get a lot of, you can see a lot of progress being made in a relatively short amount of time. I mean, the therapies that are available currently seem to only be able to slow down the aging process. And we haven't, if you look at, this is kind of based on mostly animal trials, because, human longevity trials are just infeasible. So if you look at, metformin, rapamycin, NAD precursors and supplementation and things like that, they don't necessarily, I mean, some of them do make animals live a little bit longer, 10, 15, 20, 30%. But the key is, humans can be a long-lived species. I mean, our theoretical maximum age is about 115, 120, depending on who you ask. And yet most people after the age of 60, they just start this gradual downhill, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and then frailty, things like that. And there are some people out there that, they get a lot of attention, a lot of research. The centenarians who live life with this squared curve where they're very healthy and vigorous until the last couple of years of their life, where everything just kind of catches up with them all at once, and boom, they make it past 100. So I think it's hard to tell whether we can kind of mimic what centenarians are doing, but it could be possible. I think that is possible, right, with our current available therapies. It's going to take combinations, probably, but to actually extend life, to actually start adding years beyond that, 115, 120 limit, those are still in the pipeline. But it's why people much smarter than I am who are working on those therapies. And like I said, our goal right now is just to kind of keep people healthy enough so that Ray Kurzweil calls it the longevity escape velocity. You add little by little by little until the point where you escape the Earth's atmosphere. In this case, death's grip.
Yeah. So you become like Benjamin Button, who's actually aging backwards. It's the Brad Pitt movie, if you've watched it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I know about it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird. He's dating a woman in the movie, and he's going backwards. And at some point, they're the same age, and then he keeps going younger, and she gets older. It's a really interesting, fascinating movie. So you're the co-founder of a company called Agelessrx.com, or that's the website, and you're certainly helping people with some of these longevity enhancements and treatments. So tell us about what services your company provides to consumers.
Sure. So we started out as a company called Qualitude, quality being a reference to quality adjusted life year. And so we launched about a little under a year ago. And the idea was there's this movement, and it's almost like a snowballing movement of people who are interested in living longer and healthier. And there was an article in CNBC sometime early last year talking about how people in Silicon Valley, investors and VCs and whatnot, entrepreneurs kind of taking metformin because they saw the research was very promising and helping them live longer, but a lot of them wouldn't do it publicly. A lot of them wouldn't come out and do it publicly. So, but they were able to obtain it. But the average person, it's a shame that they have access to the same science. They have access to, the internet's a wonderful thing. You have access to so many articles, so much information, podcasts, books, whatnot. But the issue there, or the main firewall there was this prescription. Metformin and other potential longevity therapies are only available by prescription. So like I said, there's been this trend of telemedicine, and we were kind of hoping to. Our plan is to take advantage of those trends in telemedicine and the technological changes, the regulatory changes, to be able to offer these longevity therapies as easily as you can get like birth control or something online.
That's great. So people can go to your website, they can schedule a consultation with you or one of your associated physicians, I would imagine. And then you would provide them recommendations. So now you should start with 1, 2, or 3, and then they can get that on an ongoing basis from the website or from the company, correct?
Yeah, well, currently, our company is growing in phases. Currently, we're still kind of almost in our first phase of growth, where we're offering prescriptions for people who are interested in our products, and we offer, like I said, we offer the rationale and the science and things like that, and educational aspect to it. As we move into kind of our second phase, where we start talking a little bit more about providing like detailed consultations for patients to help them figure out what it is that they should be taking. So we haven't quite entered that phase. We're kind of really at the really early beginning of that phase. Other phases of our company, our organization, include actual clinical trial research. And so the idea is that we would research promising therapies, figure out which ones work, which ones don't, what are some good combinations, what might seem like good combinations may not be. And then once we kind of get data on that, we start rolling it out on our telemedicine platform to whoever is interested in those therapies.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it certainly helps that you are yourself licensed in about 50 states, or all the states, and I believe a province in Canada as well. Did you do that just to start the company, or were you licensed in all these states from before?
So I started telemedicine several years ago. I have a computer science background. That was kind of my first degree. Before medical school, I was working a little bit in IT and things like that. So I could see the trend heading towards telemedicine. Prevention medicine, functional medicine, holistic medicine tends to lend itself fairly well to telemedicine. The prescriptions that we use is, supplements recommend, dietary approaches, things like that. These are all things that you can do fairly well by telemedicine. So I kind of saw that trend and when I first started, I didn't have this particular company in mind, but I knew I wanted to do something in the holistic space. I knew I wanted to do something in the longevity space. And when this opportunity came up, my co-founder Anar had approached me about it, I was like, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
and here we are almost a year later.
Yeah, and it's a crazy timing because we're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, which is accelerating the trend towards telemedicine and telehealth in particular. So I think that you're one of the companies that will definitely stand to gain and grow hopefully during this period.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you should mention coronavirus because, the COVID pandemic has kind of brought this idea of frailty and premature aging to the forefront. If you look at the statistics on who does it worse with coronavirus, it's people who have diseases of premature aging. People with diabetes, elderly people who have weakened immune systems and things like that. People who don't have a robust immune system to begin with. So it's really so we're really actually taking a look at ways. There's been a big movement to look at therapies to try to boost the host defense against the virus, rather than just rely on just an immunization or just like an antiviral to come along and save the day. And I think that actually more than I think the telemedicine regulations, although that's been a big boon to us as well. I think more than that, it's gonna accelerate the longevity field even further.
Absolutely. So let's talk about one of the most important reasons, at least in my opinion, of why we age faster and have all these issues, which is glycemic variability or spikes in our glucose levels, mainly due to the food that we eat. Mm-hmm. And we know that high levels of blood sugar leads to diabetes, type 2, which can lead to a host of other degenerative diseases down the road, which is not good. And so now there's devices that can monitor your blood sugar 24/7. And the benefit of using some of these devices is that you get a read on every meal that you're eating, so you can see your individualized response to all kinds of meals, which helps you better plan and really eat what you're doing. So first of all, Dr. Z, what is your guidance to patients regarding blood glucose levels?
The lower the better, to be quite honest. If you look at research, the lower you can bring your blood sugar down, the better. Below a certain point, it may not be worth pushing it any lower. But the general guidance is somewhere between, so the normal range. So let me back up a little bit. So the normal range based on like lab references depending on the lab, is between like 60 and 90. And this is fasting blood sugar in milligrams per deciliter. There are other. In Canada, we actually use a different measuring system, and I think parts of Europe as well. But I don't want to get into that. So that's kind of the normal range, and there's a whole science behind how they determine normal range and things like that. It's a population thing. But optimal seems to be kind of almost as low as possible, as low as as low as your body can tolerate. I mean, there are some people who are like keto adapted. They can survive on a blood sugar of like 40, which would normally put somebody into a coma if you're not keto adapted. I think a good range to shoot for is somewhere between 60 to 80. Once you get beyond 80, you're starting to push it. Once you get beyond 90 or 100, then that's kind of that should start signaling warning signs. Once you get beyond like 120, that starts turning into diabetes.
Okay. In terms of, how you're helping people monitor their blood glucose, you're obviously helping them with a device that they can put into their arm, a continuous glucose monitoring device at Agelessrx.com. Can you tell us how it particularly works and what the experience is for a patient that uses that device?
Sure. So the device is called a CGM, or continuous glucose monitor. There's two on the market that I know of. We offer the one by Abbott Labs called the Freestyle Libre, and basically it's a little patch. I wish I had one. I had one with me, but I gave it to somebody. It's a little patch that you wear usually on your arm, and it stays there for 14 days. Basically, it inserts a small little filament. You don't even feel the filament, and you barely even feel the poke. Sometimes some people don't even feel the poke, and it just kind of attaches to your arm, and it gives you a continuous read of your blood sugar minute by minute. And most people with an NFC compatible device they don't even need there's an external reader that comes with it, but they don't even need the external reader for most people. So the idea is that the best way to get out of it is to kind of keep a food log, what you've eaten, like your activity levels, things like that, and then kind of correlate that with where your blood sugars are at. It's hard. It always amazes me, like what foods and what activities and things like that can affect people's blood sugar. It's not always intuitive. And there's a lot to it. It's not just about glycemic load or glycemic index, although obviously that is important, but sometimes it has to do with other types of hormone issues that occur when you eat certain foods that could either spike or crash your sugar.
Yeah, like cortisol, for example.
Right. Right. Cortisol. There's CCK. There's I can't even remember all these acronyms off the top of my head. But when you eat a food, there's a lot that goes. It's not just break it down to sugar. Sugar enters your blood. There's a lot more to it. There's signaling to the pancreas to give out the digestive enzymes, to give off insulin, and like you said, cortisol, things like that. So it's a very complex. As much as we'd like to kind of boil it down to glycemic index or glycemic load, you just have to watch that. That's not necessarily always the case.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Your co-founder Anar sent me one, and I've still to get it because I just moved or I drove to a different place. But I'm going to get that in the next couple of days. Sure. I'm going to stick it, and I'm going to monitor everything I eat, my stress levels in the morning, when I'm going to bed. So I get a good feel for how my body individually responds to the foods that I eat, right? For example, I could have high blood sugar from honey, which I typically eat before I go to bed. So I don't know. But once I start to understand my patterns, then I can reduce some of the foods that might cause spikes. But also, as you said, I can monitor outside of food, what else is going on? Am I stressed out? Did I do something interesting? Did I do an exercise routine that caused either an upswing or a downswing in my glucose? So it just helps you become a human that's better adapted for a longevity lifestyle. And I assume, Dr. Z, that in a few years, we're going to have all kinds of sensors that we can put into our bodies, and you can get your inflammation levels, you can get your blood sugar levels, and like tens and tens of readings, which you have to
Sure.
go to your doctor for, right? Blood pressure.
Right. That technology always seems to be 5 or 10 years away. It'll be here eventually. I'm confident it'll be here eventually. But it's just funny how it seems to be always 5 or 10 years away. But going back to the sugar thing for an issue, so for an issue for a minute. So I mean, people don't realize that the fluctuations in blood sugar can have really adverse effects on mood and sleep. A lot of times people mistake panic attacks for hypoglycemic attacks or hypoglycemic episodes. And a lot of times that has to do with, adrenal fatigue or adrenal burnout, where you just can't handle, you can't handle a stressor and then it causes kind of a crash in your sugar. Or this roller coaster phenomenon that a lot of people find themselves on where they have, a high carb meal, let's say, a bagel for breakfast. It spikes their sugar and then, their pancreas spits out a lot of insulin and then it crashes it. And then they get hungry and then reach for a candy bar or a donut. Again, spike, crash. So you get the spike, crash phenomenon and the spikes over time, the spikes get higher and the crashes get lower. And so you actually end up, with symptomatic hypoglycemia. It never quite gets high enough to become like full out, like hyperglycemic where you're peeing out the sugar. But that's kind of where people end up heading year after year after year of doing it. And that's what's thought that kind of eventually burns your pancreas out and also burns out your insulin receptors to the point where they stop listening to all that insulin. And then you end up with insulin resistance and then eventually diabetes.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that people should not eat a bagel for breakfast, a burrito for lunch, and pizza for dinner?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yes, that's unfortunately that's the standard American diet for a lot of people, and that's just terrible for us.
Yeah, and that's the recipe for faster aging and a quicker death.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, the acronym is AGE, or Advanced Glycation End Products, and these are kind of what happens when you have sugar that attaches to a protein of some sort, and it basically it almost disables the protein. The protein starts becoming malfunction, and if you have enough of these floating around, then your cells start becoming malfunction. So, and then it starts poisoning the nerve cells and damaging the small blood vessels and causing kidney dysfunction and eye dysfunction. And that's why diabetics tend to have a lot of these what's called microvascular complications, because their tiny blood vessels are very sensitive to these ages, and then that's why it hits so many areas: your feet, your eyes, your kidneys, your blood vessels. The big blood vessels are actually they're reliant on the tiny blood vessels around them. They don't get their oxygen from the blood going through the big vessel. Your aorta, for example, the biggest blood vessel in your body, actually has tiny little capillaries and stuff that feed the blood vessel wall. So that's why that's digressing a little bit. That's why diabetics tend to age a lot more slowly, a lot more faster.
Yeah, it's very interesting you say this, because just a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Dr. William Lee, who's had a very famous TED Talk, and he talks about how to eat to beat disease. And he's also the founder of the Angiogenesis Foundation, where he talks about how diabetes, for example, is a disease where there's not enough blood vessel or blood going through your capillaries to all your organs, and your organs start failing. And so he talks about the foods you can eat that increase angiogenesis, which increases blood vessel formation and more blood. But again, if you have these AGEs that come from a high dose of carbs or sugar working against you, then they're not going to be as beneficial. So definitely, as you said, cut down the sugar, or if you must eat high carb foods, then manage that using either medications or natural substances, which leads us to, let's talk about metformin.
Okay.
And metformin is one of those molecules that's been around, I believe, for 40 or 50 years. My dad, who's a diabetic type 2, takes metformin. He has been taking for a long time. And it definitely regulates his blood sugar. So tell the listeners that don't know about metformin what it is and who should take it.
Sure. So metformin is originally derived from a plant. It's also semi-synthetic plant extract from French lilac, and it's been used in Europe for decades. I think the precursor to metformin, I think, is called fenformin, It's been used in Europe and Asia for I think since the 40s. Although don't quote me on that, but it's been a long time. It got brought to the U.S. I think in the 70s or 80s as a diabetic medication. Brand name is glucophage, but the original extract from French lilac is slightly toxic to humans, and so they've modified it to become more tolerable and less more tolerable. So metformin is actually one of the most widely used medications on the planet. I mean, with the number of diabetics and things like that that we have. So there's tons of research, a lot of patient data, a lot of research on it, and ongoing research as well. There's animal model studies, and so basically, it seems like every day we're learning more about what metformin does, but basically what it does, I mean, from a diabetic perspective, it reduces the amount of sugar that your liver releases, and it also makes your insulin receptors more sensitive to insulin. So you don't need as much insulin to kind of absorb the sugar out of the blood and into the muscles and things like that.
So that's great. It lowers blood sugar, and from what I believe I've read is it's not a hypoglycemic agent, meaning it's not lowering your blood sugar levels too much, but it's more like anti-hyper, but not hypo, right?
Yes. It's funny because many drug references do not list hypoglycemia as one of the side effects. Now, with that said, there are some people who tend to run a little hypoglycemic for reasons that we discussed a little earlier. They might have a hard time tolerating metformin above a certain dose, and I think most people, in my experience, can tolerate at least the 500 milligram dose, and vast majority 1,000 milligram dose. But every once in a while, there's somebody who has hypoglycemia, not because metformin causes, because they had it already, and metformin is just making it a little worse for them.
Yeah, I also read a study, I believe it was a few years ago, where it showed that metformin, at least for high performance athletes, it had a little bit of a reduction in peak and maximal aerobic capacity. And these were very tiny, in the 2 to 4% range. And for people that are exercising, most people that are taking metformin are probably not high endurance athletes or anything of that nature, so it probably won't impact them at all. But if you're an athlete and you're competing in the Olympics or something like that, then maybe metformin is not the drug of choice for you.
Right. So I mean, it's debatable whether, like, if you do everything right, you exercise, very stringently, you keep your sugars nice and tight and everything like that. It's debatable how much extra protection metformin will give you. There's still reason to believe, because metformin is also used. It's used off-label for PCOS. Infertility clinics use it. Weight loss clinics use it. There's some like integrative cancer clinics that also use it as well as an anti-tumor agent. But we're not sure. I mean, we haven't done a study on a large number of ultra fit humans to see whether metformin will help them or not. But to your point, if during the intake process, if somebody tells us that they're athletic, or they're going for some kind of body bulking or body weightlifting, or they have some kind of fitness goal that they want to get to, we tell them to avoid metformin, just because we're not sure. There's some data suggest that it could you don't bulk up as quickly when you're on metformin. The muscle strength seems to be intact. Just the bulk just doesn't seem to be there. I think David Sinclair called it vanity over longevity, or something like that, if you choose. But we do tell patients, if you got something going on, some kind of competition, finish your competition, or maybe just metformin is not right for you, and then come back and take the metformin. What's the hurry?
Okay, great. Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe Uber athletes should wait or shouldn't take it right away. Are there any other sets of people that you caution against taking metformin?
Yeah. So anybody with challenged kidneys, or whose kidney function doesn't work really well, anybody who have like major liver disease, trying to think, somebody who's really young. Like I said, we're not sure. It probably won't hurt them, but we're just not sure. So we caution against 20-year-olds coming to get metformin, unless there's a reason. I mean, like I said, there are plenty of fertility clinics who put young women on metformin and as part of their regimen to combat infertility. But that's kind of a different use case than what we're using it.
And what I find fascinating is that Dr. Nir Barzilai, who's the director of aging research
Mhm.
at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York, is running the first ever trial to for subjects to understand how metformin can help with aging, really. And it's really interesting the way they're doing it.
Mhm.
I believe that they're applying or giving metformin to people and noticing how long it takes for them to contract the first disease of the big four, if you will. And if it takes them longer than normal, then yes, it's delayed the aging process, and it's a good thing. Thumbs up and crossing my fingers for that trial that it goes through and it's successful.
Yeah, I mean, a lot is riding on that trial, and
Yeah,
hats
yeah.
off to researchers like Nir Barzilai to kind of who are definitely pushing the envelope on the science here, and the regulation. I mean, his objective is to convince the FDA that aging is a disease. The FDA says, well, everybody ages, so therefore it can't be a disease. Well, I mean, like we talked about earlier, aging is kind of the mother of all diseases,
Mm-hmm.
and so should be treated as such. And so this TAME trial is the first attempt to try to get the FDA to recognize aging as a disease and try to recognize endpoints that will open the door to allow other companies to explore other therapies specifically to help prevent age-related diseases.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that the FDA is on board for the first ever trial on aging. Okay, so let's jump to a new topic. I want to talk to you about NAD, or nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. I don't know why it's such a complicated name, but the more we learn about
The
NAD,
biochemists, yeah, the
I
biochemists, they
know,
love these complicated
I
names.
know they didn't know back in the day it was going to be so
No, they
successful or so
didn't.
popular.
No, it's been ignored. It's been ATP's ignored younger brother, or younger cousin. And you learn about it in high school with the whole Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, and NAD gets reduced to NAD NADH, and so to make certain number of ATPs and things like that. And we forget about it after we finish high school. Unless we go on to something in the field, we completely forget about it. And for a while, it was forgotten about. For a long while. I mean, I think we discovered NAD, as a molecule decades ago, decades and decades ago. But fast forward, in the last 20 years, it's gotten a lot of research behind it. It seems to be the key fuel for a lot of our longevity housekeeping genes, like the sirtuins.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
as you age, there's kind of a double whammy that happens. Your body doesn't make NAD as efficiently as it used to, and you use it up more. And so there's it's almost like you're leaking. The bucket's kind of leaking from both ends. The spigot's not as it's not on as much as it should be, and the hole that it's leaking from. And so that's thought to NAD deficiency eventually leads to cell dysregulation. DNA not being repaired properly, proteins not being folded properly, things like that.
Yeah, I read David Sinclair's latest book, and he gets into this in so much detail. It's one of the most important molecules, at least that we know of today. And as you said, the longevity genes get enhanced when you have enough NAD. So if you don't have enough, they're not going to do their function right, which means you're going to shorten your lifespan potentially. And then on the other hand, at least the energy in the mitochondria where it's needed, if you don't have enough, then you can't produce enough ATP, which means you don't have enough energy, which means you're lethargic and your cells don't have what it takes to
Sure,
get the job done.
absolutely.
So how are you helping consumers with NAD, and what forms of NAD are you providing them?
Sure. So NAD is made naturally in the body. Like I mentioned before, I think your body takes vitamin B3, which and converts it into, there's several steps to get it to convert it to NAD. So as you get older, these it's like it gets lost in shipment, so to speak, and it just doesn't make its way as cleanly to NAD as it was when you were younger. So there's a couple ways you could boost NAD. David Sinclair is a big proponent of what's called a precursor. He favors NMN. And the idea is that NMN is like one or two steps away from NAD itself, as opposed to niacin, which is like several steps away, and then NR is also just a couple steps away. So nicotinamide riboside and nicotinamide mononucleotide, NR and NMN, they're the two most commonly available supplements on the market. They're available over the counter. I mean, you can buy them on Amazon, from Elysium, from True Niagen. There's a lot of manufacturers that make it. And the idea is that you ingest these precursors. You can't ingest NAD directly. There are some companies that make liposomal and things like that, but I haven't really seen any convincing data yet on liposomal. But you can't ingest it directly. It gets broken down in the digestive system or the liver, and it just doesn't make it to where it needs to go. So you need to kind of you need to take the precursors, and then the idea is that the precursors then get into the cells, and the cells make more NAD from it. And that's all well and good. I mean, we don't discourage that at all. In fact, maybe sometime down the line we might consider offering a version of that. But what again, kind of fulfilling a prescription-only need, we discovered that you can get an NAD. The other way to get it, so let me, before we talk about what we offer, the other way to get it is through an IV. So there have been IV clinics that have set up shop that allow you to walk in and you sit like 4 hours, 6 hours in a chair. The nurse kind of hangs a bag and infuses you with, a few hundred milligrams of NAD very slowly, because it's very hard to tolerate when it's NAD, and you can't go fast with it at all. And so, a lot of people have really good results. They feel terrible the first day, and there's some kind of reaction that occurs when you give NAD IV like that. Not all of them, obviously, but a lot of people report like flushing and things like that, palpitations. But then they feel much better in the following days because of that we think it's because of that NAD boost. And so in between the precursors and the IV, there is a modality called iontophoresis. Iontophoresis has been around forever. I mean, the technology is almost ancient. The idea is that you generate a very small electric charge, which almost like opens pores in the skin, and it allows the charged molecule to enter the skin. Otherwise, your skin is supposed to be like a protective barrier. So it almost like temporarily through this iontophoresis almost like opens up the skin's barrier and allows it drives the charged particle under the skin into circulation. And it's used by like sports medicine doctors, instead of steroid shots, and it's got several other uses as well. It's been around for a long time. We're just repurposing the NAD. We're just repurposing the iontophoresis patches for NAD, and we seem to be getting really good results with it.
And that's great. So you have a few modalities. I definitely tried out your patches last week, which made me very calm and relaxed as I went through my day. I didn't notice a high change in energy, but that's because I have energy. I have good energy, knock on wood. And I've tried NR, nicotinamide riboside, which you mentioned as a supplement form, and I didn't really notice any change from that too, which tells me that I'm aging okay. Because if you notice a difference, that means you're lacking in NAD.
Sure.
Right?
Sometimes it's dose dependent. I mean, some people will need more or less than others. Mm-hmm. Our recommended dose, just based on our advisors and the available scientific data, is one patch once a week. You get a boost in your NAD once a week, and we think that's enough to kind of give you enough NAD to slow down the aging process. But there are people who, for example, athletes, they like NAD because it helps them recover. Sometimes they'll put on multiple patches at a time, or use it more frequently. And we don't necessarily discourage that, but like I said, I mean for maintenance, one patch a week seems to do the trick.
Okay, great. And then last question on NADs, you've also got other forms like an injection. How is that different from a patch?
So we recently started offering, it was based on popular demand, actually. There are some clinics out there that recommend, they put people on an IV infusion and then they send them home with a little vial to kind of do a self-injection. It's not really for everybody because a lot of people are squeamish in doing the injection. So that is an option, kind of a home option that we've recently started offering. Mm-hmm. Likewise with the nasal spray, there's some reason to believe that it might enter into the circulation closer to the brain, and therefore potentially get higher levels into the brain for like focus and things like that, or addiction. NAD is used quite heavily in addiction medicine, and seems to help people stave off their cravings.
Great. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, which I want to ask you about, the test, the phenotypic test that you're doing that reveals a person's biological age, meaning their internal age, as opposed to your physical age. How does that work?
So part of the whole idea of aging research and researching aging and things like that is try to find markers to figure out like where you are. I mean, where you are in terms of like your health. I mean, obviously you can look at the calendar and see where you are, in terms of what's called your chronological age, but some people age faster, some people age slower. So there's this big push to try to find these biomarkers to try to figure out, like I said, like how healthy you are from the inside. And there's multiple ways to do it. And one of the ways that seems most convenient and potentially most accurate, again, it's still being heavily researched, so we might find something better out there. When more data and more research comes out, is what's called the phenotypic age. It's research based out of the UCLA. We quote the references on our website, and the idea is that they looked at large data sets, large quantities of blood samples and things like that, and then they use sophisticated algorithms to pick out which biomarkers seem to correlate with things like mortality, premature aging, things like that. So there's a combination of 9 that we're currently using, 9 biomarkers off of standard blood tests. I mean, you can get these blood tests in pretty much any lab, and then you plug it into this calculator, and this calculator will tell you like how far apart your chronological age is and your biological age. And the idea ideally is to recommend or use interventions that will widen the gap between your chronological age and your biological age, so that you might start out, let's say, on par, and then you take metformin, for example, and then all of a sudden, 1 year later, your biological age is 2 years younger. So you've effectively almost reversed aging, by 2 years, theoretically. And likewise with other therapies and interventions, dietary change and things like that. So it's a way, it's one of the tools that we'll be using to help people track their progress.
Yeah, that's great. I'm very interested in doing this. Is this based on Dr. Steve Horvath's epigenetic stuff that he's been epigenetic tests that he's been doing out of UCLA, or this is
kind of. So the person who authored this I think Steve Horvath is on the paper, but the main author is Morgan Levine. She was at UCLA. I think she's at Yale now. That's right. Yeah. So they actually looked at the methylation, the DNA methylation clock, and they compared it to the blood marker clock, and that's kind of how they came up with this phenotypic age. Put together, the methylation with the blood markers, I think they call it DNA M phenotypic age, and that's probably ideal, but obtaining that DNA-based methylation clock test it tends to be a little on the expensive side right now. There are again lots of bright people working on bringing the cost down, bringing that cost of technology, and it's possible one day it'll be very inexpensive and very widely available.
And that whole idea is based on the premise or the fact that as we get older, right, the genetics that we have that's what it is. It's like the structure of a house. You can't change that. But epigenetics, as we're learning, influences more and more of our biology. And these could be anything from medications to supplements to exercise, to diet, to stress, to sleep. And so if we can modulate these things, then we can reverse our aging or at least slow it down. And you can measure that again in a few months or a few years to see how you're doing. So then,
absolutely.
So when somebody
it's the noise, it's considered to be the noise, the analog noise, where I think David Sinclair talks about analog versus digital. DNA is digital. It doesn't really change much. DNA is actually very stable. I mean, they can pull DNA out of Neanderthals that are 200,000 years old. But it's the noise around what's called, that's why they call it epigenetic, or epigenetic age, some people call it, because those methylation patterns is reflective of the noise around the digital, the analog noise around the digital data.
Yeah, absolutely. So people can go to your website and take the test, and then what do they do next? Do they get recommendations on how to improve their biological age?
So they can go to our website. If you have blood work from your doctor, if you go to Life Extension or get blood work on your own, you can then kind of plug those markers into a free calculator we have online. It'll tell you what your phenotypic age is, your bio age. But for those who don't, we offer that panel for relatively modest cost. For patients who want, we're kind of about citizen science and self-experimentation and things like that. So for patients who want to take that biological age, go out, do interventions, or get the therapies from us, and then track that. Again, our company growing in phases. Our next phase will be, trying to not only capture more data to try to figure out what better markers or more available markers there are to kind of track the aging process and how various therapies kind of slow that down. We're not there yet. Currently, we just recently launched a what's called a longevity consultation. You complete an intake form like your lifestyle, medical history, things like that, plus or minus the blood work. And then we give you a report and you sit down and do a consultation, and we can tell you, we recommend, X, Y, and Z, and prescriptions, for example, and then ABC supplements based on your intake and things like that. So we just recently started offering that. So for anybody who's not sure what to do, that would be a very good option.
That's great. So Dr. Z, thank you so much for your time. Where can people go to find out more about you and your company?
Yeah, so Agelessrx.com. If you have any questions or like to reach out to me, my staff can be reached at info@Agelessrx.com. I can be reached at doctor@Agelessrx.com. We'd love to hear from you.
And so I'll put the show notes. I'll have all of these links down in the show notes for this podcast episode, which is going to be at antiaginghacks.net/agelessrx. And the website is agelessrx.com. So again, I'll put that in the show notes. Dr. Z, thank you again so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Sure. It's great to be on. Thank you.